Hello there, my name is Jocelyn, you may call me Joy, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the Conservatives. However, please try not to be too scared or put off by this outwardly non-traditional appearance. I assure you it is just a phase, and by phase I don't mean the tattoos and stuff. I mean the transgender thing, because that's the scariest part of all. Like, whatever will the children think? Trans people are humans and deserve human rights? Can't allow that now, can we? Not at least until it's convenient for the Conservatives themselves. So, let's talk about Jamie Wallis, the first British MP to come out as transgender. Jamie is a Tory. Big shock, big twist, massive surprise. Who would have seen that coming? I mean, of course he's a fucking Tory. Like, these people are so repressed. It seems like in their private lives they're all sex deviant perverts, drug abusers and Nazis. If only they could just foster an environment of acceptance towards the alternative sexualities and lifestyles, then maybe, just maybe, they would remove some of the shame and stigma that is currently put on them. Although that whole Nazi thing, I mean, that's never a good thing to be. Just saying. And you may think my assessment was a bit too harsh or a bit overly dramatic for comedic purposes. Oh no, we'll see that that's actually not far from the truth. Here's what happened. Firstly, Jamie's coming out. The most important part of the statement from Jamie Wallis reads thusly: I'm trans, or to be more accurate, I want to be. I've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and I felt this way since I was a very young child. I had no intention of ever sharing this with you. I always imagined I would leave politics well before I ever said this out loud. There was a close call in April 2020 when someone blackmailed me, outed me to my father, and sent photographs to other family members. He wanted £50,000 to keep quiet. The police were so supportive, so understanding, and on this occasion the system worked. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison. For a while it seemed as though I would be able to get on with things and move on. Being an MP and hiding something like this was always going to be tough, but I arrogantly assumed I was up for it. Well, I'm not. A few months back, in September, I hooked up with someone who I met online, and when I chose to say no on the basis that he wouldn't wear a condom, he chose to rape me. I have not been myself since this incident, and I don't think I will ever recover. It is not something you ever forget, and it is not something you ever move on from. Since then, things have really taken a tumble. I am not okay. When I crashed my car on the 28th of November, I fled the scene. I did so because I was terrified. I have PTSD and I honestly have no idea what I was doing, except I was overcome by an overwhelming sense of fear. I am sorry that it appears I ran away, but this isn't how it happened in the moment. Tonight I was reminded of the incredible support those you work with can provide. Also, I was reminded how important it is to be yourself. I have never lived my truth and I am not sure how. Perhaps it starts with telling everyone. So before we address the whole trans thing, I just want to mention that car crash. That was a crime. Or at the very least, an unreported incident. No one is talking about this. Of course, no one is investigating this. Damn politicians get away with everything. Secondly, while I do feel it is horrible that someone has had to repress who they are, live a lie, and been abused, I think that the Conservatives basically are making it harder for people to come forward with all of this, and the police are working in spite of what they are saying. What the modern Conservative Party wants is an appearance of acceptance. That's not what they really want. It's not how they really feel. In response to the statement, though, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the following the next day: Mr. Speaker, the whole House will have read the statement today from my honourable friend, the member for Bridgend, and I know that the House stands with you and will give you the support that you need to live freely as yourself. That's a nice statement. It's full of supportive words and everything, but it does ring hollow. Literally, the day before, Boris Johnson opened a speech at a dinner for MPs with this gag. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or as Keir Starmer would put it, people who are assigned female or male at birth. This is not okay. Using the language that we use to accurately describe someone's circumstances of birth against us, or just as a weapon against his political opponent, is not okay. Kind of tells you that he's not really up with the whole transgender acceptance thing, and is just using the language that we use as a cudgel. And to be honest, while ladies and gentlemen is outdated, it still describes trans women and men, just not in the way that they would have it. That's a great look for you, Bojo. Like, so accepting. Super kawaii. And let us not forget that this is the same party that holds Liz Truss, the current Foreign Secretary, who either was or is, I'm not still sure on that, the Women's and Equalities Minister, who has said questionable things in the recent past while bowing to TERF pressure. I made a video about this back in the summer of 2020. This is the person who more recently defended Boris Johnson's trip to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to go kiss his feet for oil. This party is also home to Sajid Javid, who is, I think, the current health minister. You know, the one in charge of the NHS and the funding that goes towards trans people, or in this country doesn't. He's the one that criticised the Labour Party's position on essentially implying that trans identities are unscientific. Psychological, sociological, anthropological, and biological realities don't matter to this man. And oh, but it gets so much worse, because not even a week after all of this revelation stuff, we then get the Imran Ahmad Khan story. This is the MP, Conservative, guilty of a sex assault on a 15-year-old boy. Yeah. Imran Ahmad Khan, who represents Wakefield, had denied groping the teenager at a house in Staffordshire in January 2008. Southwark Crown Court heard Khan forced the youngster to drink gin, dragged him upstairs and asked him to watch pornography before assaulting him. Khan, 48, was found guilty after a week-long trial. I'm just going to leave this graphic up on the screen for a little while so that you can really get all of the full impression of what happened here. Thank you to my researcher for providing me with this graphic. Now, what I see as the problem here is that while the Labour Party and other left-wing leaning parties are, well, they come across as wishy-washy or feeble on the stance of gender, they do manage to get the right answer just without being able to show their workings. The Conservatives are just dead wrong. And their hard guidelines that are deliberately designed to exclude trans people and pander to transphobic, gender-critical movements that, you know, is so virulent in the UK today, as well as the US, with all of these wonderful new bills that are designed to make trans children feel like shit. Not to mention their healthcare providers and parents. The way I see it, news, entertainment, culture and politics are, I don't know if it's always been this way or if it's me noticing it more, or whether it is in fact all of these things just melding together like in more modern times as the internet takes over more of our like everyday lives. We get all of these things from one source. And I think that the rise of transphobia is one of the results, as sort of a backlash to the rise of transgender people coming together and speaking out. So I would like to pose a question, a hypothetical, what do you think kind of deal. Will Jamie Wallace remain a Conservative? Maybe he will. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that someone with Conservative views could also be transgender outwardly and, publicly. He could become another Rose White / Blair of Dawn figure. Maybe he won't. Maybe he will see that actually this party is not working in his best interests. And by the way, I will explain the whole pronouns thing. See, at the moment, he is still using he pronouns. Pronouns are generally things used by others to describe a person. Basically, pronouns more or less are earned, not prescribed. In many settings, even today, people generally tend to call me she or her all the time based on their perception of me, not the reality of the fact that I, in fact, much prefer they/them pronouns. It also wasn't that long after Wallace came out that Boris Johnson decided to say the following things with no real scientific backing whatsoever. Boris Johnson says biological males should not compete in women's sports. The Prime Minister adds that women should have spaces in hospitals, prisons and changing rooms that are dedicated to them alone. Well, why not? But why does that not include trans women? Boris Johnson has said he does not think biological males should be competing in women's sports as he set out his position on transgender issues. The Prime Minister said the sensible view was that transgender athletes, such as Leah Thomas, a swimmer who won America's top trophy in university sports last month, should not be allowed to compete alongside biological women, and that children should not be allowed to decide their own gender without parental assistance. Leah Thomas is biologically a woman. She has been taking biologically female hormones. And children, just like everybody else, don't really decide their genders. It's just how it is. Oftentimes, parental guidance and assistance will help with them. And that's the point. Like, you're supposed to get support from your parents. And also gender therapy professionals, wherever that's needed. But, yeah, the fact that he thinks it's a decision is just dead wrong. And even without parental influence, a child's gender is still going to be what it is. Nobody can change that. His most comprehensive comments yet on transgender issues came days after the government decided not to ban trans conversion therapy, as the Conservative Party promised at the last election. Yes, that's right. Transgender-based conversion therapy, which, as we all know, is just a nice way of labelling brainwashy abuse. That's still legal. in this country. Mr. Johnson also said he thought it was important to have women-only spaces in hospitals, prisons and changing rooms, but admitted there were complexities and sensitivities around transgender issues that still need to be worked out. Which is a nice way of saying he has no fucking idea what he's talking about. Again, I mentioned this in my video about the Labour Party. Whilst well-intentioned, they are not gender experts. This is the result of someone ill-intentioned getting involved when they are not an expert. Downing Street has faced backlash from equalities groups since its decision to scrap the trans conversion therapy ban. It has now cancelled an LGBTQ conference that was scheduled to take place in June on the 50th anniversary of the first Pride marches in London, shying away from the issues and the people who would like to enable change for the better is not governance. It's burying your head in the sand. Conversion therapy attempts to change or suppress someone's sexuality or gender identity. It is already outlawed in several other countries. The decision also prompted the resignation of Ian Anderson, the UK's first LGBT+ business champion. Speaking on a visit to hospital in Welwyn Garden City on Wednesday, Mr. Johnson said there were complexities and sensitivities when you move from the area of sexuality to the question of gender. There, I'm afraid, are things that I think still need to be worked out, he said. What things? What complexities? What sensitivities? Oh, yeah, that's right. You're trying to look the best you can, the best polished face that you can. I mean, you can't really polish a turd, but you can stick some weird hair on it, apparently. But what he really wants to do, just like Liz Truss, just like the rest of the Conservatives, is pander to their real agenda, the transphobic agenda, the one that excludes trans people from sex-segregated spaces. On the issue of transgender women competing in sports events and female-only spaces, he said, "I don't think that biological males should be competing in female sporting events. Maybe that is a controversial thing to say, but it just seems to me to be sensible. I also think women should have spaces, whether it's in hospitals or prisons or changing rooms or whatever, which are dedicated to women. That's as far as my thinking has developed on this issue. If that puts me in conflict with some others, then we have got to work it all out." Well, yes, that is going to put you in conflict with others. Yes, it is controversial. Doesn't give you license not to do the right thing. Which is to accept that trans women are women, trans men are men, and all of these bad things that happen in women's spaces that are the result of trans people going into women's spaces or men's only spaces, largely fabricated. You've got more issues with the people running your own fucking party than you do with a whole country of, 66 million people or whatever, in which a small percentage of those is trans. The Telegraph understands the government has no plans to issue any directive to sports bodies about changing their transgender guidance. Mr. Johnson's intervention was hailed by former athletes previously branded as transphobic for calling for trans women to be excluded from female sports. Sharon Davies, who won a swimming silver medal for Great Britain at the 1980 Olympics, told the Telegraph she was very pleased the Prime Minister had seen fit to recognise a biological reality and support sexual equality in sports. That call was echoed by Mara Yamauchi, a former marathon runner and part Team GB at the 2008 Olympic Games and London 2012. She applauded clear leadership from the top amid what she branded was weasel words from other politicians. Now, while these people may be pretty well versed in sports, athletics, at very high professional levels. I'm pretty sure they've just been suckered in by all of this anti-trans rhetoric and haven't actually seen what the facts are when it comes to trans athletes being allowed to participate. Because if they did, they would know that any advantage that comes from being born, quote unquote, biologically male is mitigated by the rules and restrictions set up by the Olympics committees. And of course that sports are just never completely fair. Someone always has a little bit of an advantage. That's why sports is a thing, to see who has the better advantage. Mr. Johnson also said he did not believe that children should be able to choose their own gender, including by undergoing surgery to change their bodies without assistance from their parents. I don't think that it's reasonable for kids to be deemed so-called Gillick competent to take decisions about their gender or irreversible treatments that they may have, he said. I think there should be parental involvement at the very least. Gillick competence is a medical term used to describe a child under the age of 16 who is mature enough to make their decisions about their gender without parental consent. Mr. Johnson, what the fuck are you saying? You're just making stuff up now? Children do not undergo gender confirmation surgeries. Children do not take cross-sex hormones. The most intrusive treatment for minors, as recommended by gender specialist therapists and everybody else, is puberty blockers, which are reversible, completely and fully reversible. All of these concerns about irreversible treatments are null and void and shouldn't be brought up because they are irrelevant. I'm getting very mad. I'm getting very mad. In a separate interview, Sajid Javid argued that people who believe they are transgender may have either been bullied or sexually abused. Well, no shit when you foster an environment that's anti-trans. Have I been bullied in the past? Yes. But it was because of being transgender. The bullying didn't make me trans. And I think it is unfortunate that Jamie Wallace's story does include sexual abuse, because they're going to use that as an excuse to say, oh, this is why. When that's just not the case. There's plenty of people who get abused who do not then turn out to be trans, and there's plenty of people who are trans who have not been abused sexually in the past. And this is the fucking health minister. Just making up shit out of his ass. In an interview with Sky News on Wednesday, the health secretary said, "We need to be more careful when it comes to conversion therapy for transgender people." He argued that it is right for medical experts to be able to question that and to determine what the cause might be. He asked, is it a genuine case of gender identity dysphoria, or could it be that that individual is suffering from some child sex abuse, for example, or could it be linked to bullying? The only way I see anyone being more careful with transgender conversion therapy is to outlaw it completely. What's fucking stopping you, Saj? His comments sparked criticism from trans rights campaigners and charities, as they should, who described them as damaging and wrong. However, he was also urged by women's rights campaigners to remind NHS trusts that they have a duty of care to safeguard women who are often at their most vulnerable when they are ill. I'm not going to disagree with that. People are very vulnerable when they're ill. Women especially. Okay? Does that include trans women who are suffering because they can't get the treatments they need? And how, by including trans women in your definition of women, would that be a threat to cisgender women? As I haven't heard a convincing argument or answer to that. The Telegraph previously revealed that there was mutiny among NHS bosses who were refusing to follow guidance from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which stated that it is lawful to exclude trans women from female-only wards in certain circumstances. So I ask you, and I ask Jamie Wallace, who would want to remain a Tory after that? As always, non-binary is valid, despite what the government might think. Have I been